So, have you ever stumbled across one of those provocative online lists that just makes you stop and think? Well, back in 2011, the website Listverse published a real doozy: Top 10 People Who Give Islam a Bad Name. As you can probably guess, it stirred up a whole lot of conversation. So today, our job isn't to agree or disagree with the list. Instead, we're just going to break down the author's choices and try to understand the logic behind this pretty controversial article.
Right off the bat, the author includes a really crucial disclaimer. They make it crystal clear that this isn't a commentary on the faith as a whole, but, in their words, merely 10 of its adherents. So that's the framework we're going to stick to as we dig in, focusing only on the arguments that the article itself presents.
Now, you might be expecting a simple countdown from 10 to 1, but we're going to tackle this a little differently. We're going to analyze this list by looking at the themes that connect these figures. It's a better way to see the patterns and common threads the author was pointing out.
Okay, so the first big theme that jumps out from this list is all about power. Specifically, it's about leaders who use the full force of their government to maintain absolute control, often for decades, under some seriously authoritarian rule.
The article starts with 4 leaders who are very much in the news back in 2011. You've got Hosni Mubarak, who ruled Egypt for 30 years under a state of emergency. There's Bashar al-Assad in Syria, who the article claims put the brakes on political reform. You have King Abdullah, who ruled a Saudi Arabia that had no elections. And of course, the famously unique Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi. To really make its point about King Abdullah, the source highlights a specific law in the Saudi court system at that time. And it's a stark one. As you can see, the testimony of one man was legally equal to the testimony of 2 women. This is a key piece of evidence the article uses in its critique of his reign.
And speaking of Gaddafi, the article also spends some time on his more bizarre side. I mean, it describes him as a dictator who was as known for his wild fashion as he was for, get this, renaming all the months of the calendar. It even quotes former US President Reagan, who apparently called Gaddafi not only a barbarian, but also flaky.
But right after mentioning the flaky stuff, the article pivots hard to some deadly serious accusations. It alleges that he gave safe harbor to international terrorists like Carlos the Jackal, that he was likely behind the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103, and that during the unrest in 2011, his regime killed thousands of protesters. All right, so we've covered the authoritarians. Now the list takes a much, much darker turn. The next theme is about figures who are accused of orchestrating mass violence and just unbelievable brutality on a national scale.
So in this category, the source names 3 men: Talat Pasha from the Ottoman Empire, Idi Amin of Uganda, and Saddam Hussein of Iraq. The article groups them together for what it describes as extreme violence directed squarely at their own people.
First up is Talat Pasha. The article labels him as the key architect of the Armenian genocide. And to try and capture the sheer scale of this tragedy, the source cites a high-end estimate that 1.5 million Armenians perished.
Next, the article turns to Idi Amin's brutal 8-year rule in Uganda. The upper estimate it cites is 300,000. That's 300,000 Ugandans who were reportedly tortured and murdered while he was president. And to illustrate the kind of personal cruelty the source attributes to Amin, the article includes this absolutely harrowing testimony from one of his own guards. I mean, it paints a picture of a man who didn't just order violence, but according to this account, took part in it himself in the most gruesome ways.
The article then lays out the timeline for Saddam Hussein, tracing his path from a young man joining the Ba'ath Party all the way to becoming the absolute ruler of Iraq. The source makes sure to highlight his brutal tactics, specifically pointing to the 1988 chemical weapon attack on the Kurdish town of Halabja. And then it follows his story right to the end, his capture by US forces in 2003 and his execution in 2006.
Okay, so this final group of individuals on the list is framed just a little bit differently. According to the article, their influence wasn't just contained within the borders of one nation. No, it was rooted in an ideology that they tried to export to the rest of the world, often through global terror. These last 3 are presented as the ideologues: Haj Amin al-Husseini, who was the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Osama bin Laden, the founder of al-Qaeda, and Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, the leader of the Iranian Revolution. The article connects them all through this idea that they wanted to export their ideology to the whole world.
To make its case against al-Husseini, the article uses this direct quote, calling him a passionate anti-Semite who even collaborated with the Nazis.
And, of course, jumping to a much more contemporary figure, the article includes Osama bin Laden. The reasons for his inclusion, according to the source, are pretty straightforward: founding al-Qaeda and being the architect of the September 11th attacks.
And then, turning to Ayatollah Khomeini, the article cites the memoirs of another Grand Ayatollah to get to this number. It's just a staggering figure. It alleges that 30,000 political prisoners and activists were executed on a direct order from Khomeini.
And the article provides this quote from 1979 to show his justification for it. You can see he's not framing political opposition as simple dissent. He's calling it corruption and destruction, something that has to be crushed and punished to protect God's order.
So, okay, we've walked through the article's 10 choices and the reasoning behind them. What's the bigger picture here? What does a list like this actually tell us about how reputations get formed on a global stage?
Well, the most important takeaway is that the author's choices really weren't random. They fall neatly into 3 distinct, though sometimes overlapping, themes: the abuse of authoritarian power, the orchestration of mass violence, and the promotion of a global ideology of terror.
And this whole thing leaves us with the central question an article like this really forces you to ask. It's not about whether this specific list is right or wrong. It's about the sheer power of notoriety. When the actions of one single infamous individual are broadcast to the entire world, how does that shape the way we see the millions of people they claim to represent? That is something worth thinking about.